You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Real quick, right off the jump, please go and do me a favor. Hit that like button. Jump in the comment section down below as well. Hit me with your Mailbag Monday questions. I obviously will not be able to answer them on today's episode, but I'll make sure to bookmark them and answer them on the show this time next week. And last but certainly not least, please go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already. It's 100% free, will not cost you anything, and is the best way to show support and help me out as I'm now on the climb to 3,000 subscribers. But happy Monday, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Hope everyone out there had themselves a wonderful St. Paddy's Day weekend, and hope everyone's battling through the wonky weather conditions that we've gotten here in the Chicagoland area over the last 5 days, up to 70 degrees on Friday, and then because, of course, we get snow yesterday, it's going to climb back up into the 60s over these next 2 days before dipping back down into the 30s on Thursday. I hope everyone is managing their way through it. But thank you all again for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. To open things up on the show here today, 6-2 loss for the Blackhawks in their lone contest over the weekend to the Vancouver Canucks as Connor Bedard returned home to British Columbia. Vancouver has just really given the Blackhawks fits over the last handful of years. That obviously continued on Saturday night, even though it really wasn't like a god-awful performance out of the Blackhawks. They only surrendered 15 shots on goal, including Vancouver having no more than 6 in a single period. If you go and look at the analytics at Natural Stat Trick, all of them were basically in the Blackhawks' favor, and I think the only one that wasn't was the high danger chances metric, in which both teams only accumulated 6. So certainly not a god-awful performance out of the Blackhawks, but one where they still were plagued by sloppiness, as you would kind of expect in a game in which they surrendered 6 goals. Arvid Soderblom, not his finest performance, and I do wonder if kind of the different scheduling that he's been going through since the Blackhawks acquired Spencer Knight from the Florida Panthers. He's now, of course, their shining star in between the pipes. And with Soderblom in the last 2 months, prior to Peter Mrazek being dealt to Detroit and the Blackhawks acquiring Knight from Florida, he was the one who really had been their shining star. And now they do still have hopes for this kid, but he's just not in that same category and doesn't have that same upside as Spencer Knight possesses. So that's just put Knight in a position to get more of the lion's share of starts since he's joined the Blackhawks. And I think kind of just the different scheduling, at least that's what I've put into my mind. I think we could have seen that come into play on Saturday for Soderblom, as he unfortunately had one of his worst performances of the season and one that really impacted his season-long numbers. I saw Ben Pope of the Chicago Sun-Times said it dropped his season save percentage down to from .905 to .901. So certainly a toughie there for Arvid Soderblom as the Blackhawks yet another loss on the road. They've now dropped 24 of their last 28 on the road. But my real big takeaway from this loss to Vancouver on Saturday, Blackhawks fans, and I think the number one hit, if you were to go and type in Blackhawks versus Canucks in Google right now, what would pop up would be Connor Bedard receiving a 10-minute misconduct for the second consecutive game. And to me, and I think many of you Blackhawks fans watching and listening to this out there likely feel like neither really warranted this kind of punishment. Going back to Thursday's loss to the San Jose Sharks, Bedard, with the Hawks trailing in the third period, picks up a game misconduct after Mario Ferraro, defenseman for the San Jose Sharks, appeared to trip him up. Penalty doesn't get called, as the way things have gone for Bedard all season long. In the sequence after, you can see him kind of giving it to the official a little bit, and then he winds up picking up a 10-minute misconduct, the first actually of his NHL career. And granted, we didn't exactly hear what Connor Bedard said to the official, and in his post-game interview after, he said he didn't remember what he said, which I think is a bunch of hooey, obviously, but just knowing the type of kid that Connor Bedard is, I know the frustration has kind of reached a boiling point here, and that's also been a little bit obvious, but I'd be really shocked if he crossed the line and went so out of character to say something that would cross the line in terms of the standard comments that you get from NHL players towards these officials. Like, I would be really surprised to see Connor Bedard cross that threshold to truly warrant a game misconduct. And just kind of based on how Bedard has been treated this year, I wouldn't be surprised to say, like, to go as far as saying, like, I think 90% of players who probably make that type of comment, again, I don't know what was said, but I feel like a veteran player with more experience probably doesn't pick up a 10-minute game misconduct there or whatever, so be it. But then going into Saturday against the Vancouver Canucks, considering the Blackhawks were suffering yet another lopsided loss, which Bedard has had to deal with since stepping onto the NHL scene. And he's returning home, obviously, and the Blackhawks have not fared well against the Vancouver Canucks. That's on display once again. Like, I would understand if Connor Bedard had a little bit of an out-of-character type of moment here to pick up a game misconduct, but that's not seemingly what happened. This just seemed like it was a normal post-whistle skirmish, and where Bedard kind of got cluttered together and thrown a game misconduct in his direction. Like, I don't think this was anything extra that we don't see on a game-to-game nightly NHL basis. It just feels like, for whatever reason, Bedard is the one who's getting scapegoated, and he's the one having the finger pointed towards him, because I don't think there was anything there that truly warranted a game misconduct. And you even heard Andrew Sorensen following Blackhawks practice this morning say, you like to see Connor Bedard have that type of frustration and mix it up and be not afraid to stick his nose in there, right? But I didn't think it was like anything too extra that truly deserved another 10-minute game misconduct. And it just seems very clear to me that I don't know how we got to this point, but it's like everyone is against Connor Bedard at this point. And I truly don't know how we got here, Blackhawks fans, because based on the media criticism that we've seen thrown his direction all year long, despite, again, being one of the youngest players in the NHL on one of the worst teams in the NHL, you get Jeremy Roenick, who's supposed to be like a Blackhawks ambassador. He calls out Connor Bedard in a situation where, again, if Jeremy truly cared, he could have had a one-on-one, man-to-man conversation to come to a solution. That obviously didn't happen, as Jeremy aired out his dirty laundry on his own podcast. Then you get Mark Messier calling him out in the national media, Paul Bissonnette calling him out on TNT, and then just the way the officials have handled him all season long. And this is not like the first time I think Connor Bedard has been treated unfairly. I think all of us Blackhawks fans who have watched this team most nights this season can truly say that's what's been going on in terms of the lack of calls that Connor Bedard has gotten. And then whenever he is on the defensive side of things, it seems like they're nitpicking him. And now, being honest, like, I do think Bedard has to be more careful in terms of like the hooking penalties. And there are some things he's got to clean up defensively. And it feels like some of the frustration is spilling over into that side of things. But make no mistake about it, Connor Bedard is not being judged fairly when he's being the puck carrier versus when he's the defender. Like, the things that he gets called for when he's defending are the exact same things that people are doing to him when he's the puck carrier, and the calls just are not going his way. And I don't get why, for a kid who's handled himself really well, who's been in the spotlight since day one, even before day one, with all the hype and the generational talent label thrown his way, right? He's been in the spotlight for two and a half years straight now, goes through all the interviews. He's the one that everyone wants to come and see. And again, he's having to do this without a whole lot of help around him, again, on one of the worst teams in hockey, the second worst team in hockey since he's been in the NHL. And I don't get why everyone has this hatred for this kid and is almost like out to get him. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And just the unfair criticisms and the mismanagement of Connor Bedard. I don't understand how we got to this point, Blackhawks fans, but I understand his frustration. Like, seeing him after that game misconduct call on Saturday in Vancouver throw his helmet down the hallway, I'd be doing the same thing too, because for a kid who says all the right things, does everything that's asked of him, and he's so critiqued by the national media. I know Sidney Crosby had very similar things when he was first stepping onto the NHL scene, but I just don't get why the NHL has this disdain for the young big name player who's supposed to be leading this new era of hockey, right? It feels like whenever this new young stud steps into the game, the old generation just has such a tough time getting on board with them. And the officials, I feel like, are treating Connor Bedard the same way out there on the ice. So I certainly feel his frustration. And that's the thing that makes me the most upset about this. It's not like any of the media critiquing him like that or people labeling him a baby for these game misconducts or whatever narrative you want to spew. That's nothing that makes me feel bad or gets me upset. What truly makes me upset is Connor Bedard is a 19-year-old kid in the national spotlight who has to deal with all of these things. The weight on this kid's shoulders, it has to be so much. And I'm sure that's where some of the frustration is coming from. It's the expectations that he has for himself doing all of these things and still not really being handled fairly. I'm sure he could care less about the media, but just the officiating out there on the ice. They are not officiating him fairly. And I don't know why this is happening, but that's the part that hurts me the most is this 19-year-old kid has to deal with all of these things in a really, really tough situation. And golly, I just really hope the Blackhawks can get him some more help next season so they can win more games and he could not be so down in the dumps. And we don't have these moments seeing Connor Bedard chucking his helmet down the hallway because of the Blackhawks losing and him not getting the calls and having those moments in the penalty box where he's just staring blankly into the crowd, right? You hate to see these types of moments. And I really think it's because of how he's being handled out there in terms of the officials and not getting calls, being judged so harshly for the little things that he does out there. I don't really understand it, Blackhawks fans, but that seems to me like what's going on out there when I've watched the Blackhawks all year long. Let me know in the comment section down below if you feel the same way or how you feel about Bedard getting these game misconducts. Honestly, I don't even think it's a bad thing. I love to see the passion. I love to know that he cares this much, that he gets this frustrated. Give me your 2 cents down below in the comment section, but there are my thoughts on Bedard picking up back-to-back game misconducts and a pair of losses for the Blackhawks to San Jose and Vancouver. Coming up in just a moment, I'll get into the latest updates and rumors that we have on a potential Ryan Donato contract extension. But first, I got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at Factor. Eating healthy doesn't have to be complicated because with Factor, you get chef-made, dietitian-approved meals that are ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, so you can fuel your body without the hassle of cooking. And Factor meals arrive fresh, never frozen, and with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences each week, you can easily customize your menu to fit your goals, whether that's calorie smart, protein plus, or even keto. The Korean beef bowl and cream Parmesan chicken are 2 of my personal favorites. They taste homemade, but take no effort at all. And you can eat smart with Factor right now by getting started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and using the code factorpodcast in all caps to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. Again, that's the promo code factorpodcast in all caps at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box with Factor. I also got to talk to you all about Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Well, then go and crack into a great source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. And Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, as each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily nutritional value. Plus, they're packed with fiber to help keep you feeling fuller longer. So whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids at school or at practice, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. So go and get snackin and get crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch by visiting wonderfulpistachios.com in order to learn more. Again, that's wonderfulpistachios.com in order to check it out today. Segment 2 did want to be sure to discuss the latest updates and rumors we've heard in the past couple of days regarding Ryan Donato's contract decision after the Blackhawks elected not to trade him at this year's deadline. The next step would be trying to work out an extension between the two sides. And according to Ben Pope of the Chicago Sun-Times in an article that he dropped yesterday, it does seem like both parties are interested in getting an extension done. We also heard Donato, following the Blackhawks' loss to Vancouver on Saturday, say how much he loves Chicago and how much he would want to stay here and be part of the future. And then we also heard from Frank Saravalli on Daily Faceoff yesterday mention the Blackhawks have likely offered Donato a 3-year deal just south of $4 million, according to what he has heard. And now it's just kind of up to Ryan Donato as to whether he thinks that's enough value. Does he want to sign that deal, or does he want to test his luck in the free agent market? Do think it was interesting as well. Saravalli reported that the Blackhawks did have a second-round pick on the table for Ryan Donato, but of course elected not to make that trade, which to me, I think if they were pretty positive they were going to get Donato an extension done with Donato, and hearing Saravalli talk and just watching Donato play for this team all season long, what it really sounded like it came down to is how big of a part of this team Ryan Donato has been, and also not only just the uptick that he's made offensively, while there obviously would be some concerns about him regressing and coming back down to earth with the shooting percentage and the playmaking being up so much this season in particular, one thing they really do like is how Donato's kind of reworked his skating mechanics in this past offseason. They believe that does give him now a higher upside than he previously had at any point of his career. So knowing that, and again, assuming that they turn this deal down, that to me tells me that exactly what we heard Donato say the other night. He wants to be here in Chicago. And as Ben reported, the two sides want to get an extension done. I feel like the Blackhawks would have probably taken that second round pick had they felt like Donato was more likely to leave them in the free agent market, but that still is a possibility. And hearing the deal that the Blackhawks offered, honestly, to me, it was a little bit lower than I envisioned. I thought they were going to be offering Donato 3 years at like $4.5 million. To hear that it was south of $4 million, which to me would have me guessing like 3.75, 3.8 million for 3 years time. That's a deal that I'd be in with Ryan Donato for the next couple of years. Honestly, though, Blackhawks fans, the one thing that does concern me is the 3-year deal, because we've seen that kind of be an issue for Kyle Davidson since stepping in as the general manager. The extra year, the 1 year too long type of contract has put the Blackhawks in a little bit of a precarious spot. Not that it's mattered so much because they're still at the bottom of the standings and rebuilding, but when they start to take these next steps, those deals are going to be more and more crucial. And giving Tyler Bertuzzi 4 years instead of 3, maybe that's what it took to get him here, but certainly doesn't look like the greatest contract. Teuvo has definitely picked up his play over the last 3 months. I still don't love the 3-year deal for him either. And a 3-year deal for Donato, I don't necessarily love, just because so much can change in 3 years' time. And like the 2-year extension we saw for Dickinson, the 2-year extension we saw for Mrazek, yeah, those made sense at the time, but at the end of them, they can also be contracts that you're not necessarily feeling the same way about as you did at the start. So that's kind of my concern about giving Ryan Donato a 3-year deal. But again, the Blackhawks do have to reach that salary cap floor. I understand it. And if that's what it takes to sign Ryan Donato, is giving him a 3-year deal, I'd be on board with that at $3.75 million. I'd probably even be a little bit more. I'd be okay with it at $4 million. I'd still have those concerns about giving out a 3-year extension. But ultimately, going to be interesting to see what Ryan Donato does. Does he sign on with the Blackhawks and get that comfortable 3-year contract at nearly $4 million? Or does he test his luck in the offseason and maybe get the same term at another $500,000 extra per year? That's the gamble in turning down this deal and going into the free agent market. I think I'd be surprised based on what we've heard from Donato and how much the Blackhawks like him. I think they're going to get a deal done, probably right around that $4 million number. I don't know, like if they told Donato this is as high as they'd go, or exactly how the contract negotiations are going about, but I do expect them to wind up getting a deal done. I did think it was interesting in an article posted by Ben Pope as well. He highlighted 2 potential comparison contracts out there, similar to what we could be seeing Ryan Donato get. One of those was Frank Vatrano with the Anaheim Ducks. The other, Anthony Duclair with the New York Islanders, which he signed last summer. For Vatrano, obviously, there's some interesting details that go on in the salary as he's in California, but it ultimately comes out at 3 years at $4.57 million. And Vetrano's 31 years old. Donato's about to be 29. And both of those guys have kind of bounced around with multiple teams as bottom six type of guys before really finding their role and footing with these rebuilding clubs. Vetrano with Anaheim, Donato with Chicago. There's a lot of similarities there. So that's also why I kind of expected $4 million to more so be in play. I think Vetrano probably has the better true skill set than Ryan Donato, but they're very, very similar. And Donato is 2 years younger. And then Anthony Duclair, very different style of player than Ryan Donato. Obviously, he's like straight speed and offense. But 4 years at $3.5 million, I do think is an interesting comp contract. If like Donato were to go on the open market, I don't think the Blackhawks want to be giving him a 4-year deal, but there is an opportunity, I think, for someone to give him a deal of 4 years at like 3.75 million, like we saw with Anthony Duclair last summer, especially with the salary cap set to start going up. Duclair, 29 years old, right in that same age range. Another guy who's kind of been in the bottom six most of his career, but can jump up in the lineup from time to time. So I think those are two pretty fair comp contracts. I think Donato's probably somewhere in the middle of those two. Like I said, if he signs with the Blackhawks, I think it'll probably be right around 3.75 to 4 million. But should he test the open market, there is a possibility that he could get a little bit more than that. We'll see what Ryan Donato ultimately winds up doing, but there is the latest we have from Frank Saravalli as far as where the Blackhawks and Donato are at in terms of a contract extension. Coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, before I close out today's show, still have to get into my weekly Mailbag Monday fan segment. Real quick, though, I do got to talk to you all about Monarch Money. Ever checked your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's really easy to lose track. But that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you can just stop managing your money and start building wealth. And what I personally love about Monarch Money is that instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So to take advantage of your finances with Monarch Money, make sure to go and use the code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps right now at monarchmoney.com, and you'll get 50% off on your first year. Again, that's monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year at Monarch Money.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Blackhawks. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone out there for making the show your very first listen. Here to start off your week. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter down the home stretch of the regular season with the local coverage you love from Locked On. You can easily go and find Locked On NHL right now on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, for the first time in 2 weeks, back to the regularly scheduled Mailbag Monday, on Monday. And for those of you who weren't able to get your questions in for this week, make sure to drop them down in the comment section below right now. Or if you're listening on an audio platform, you can easily drop your cues in the review section, preferably with a 5-star rating. Those always put a big smile on my face. Or you can even email lockdownblackhawks@gmail.com. Make sure to hit me with your questions. I'll bookmark them and answer them live on the show this time next week. First question that I got to answer on today's show comes from Northern Warrior Hockey, who asked, let's say the Blackhawks draft Michael Misa. Would it be crazy to try to trade our second first-round pick to San Jose for Igor Chernyshov? I think he's what the Hawks need, a power forward with size and speed, and he has already built some chemistry with Misa. I don't think it's a crazy idea for the Blackhawks. For those who may have forgotten or don't know, the Blackhawks not only have their own first round pick in this year's draft, which is hopefully going to be one of the first couple, but they also have the Toronto Maple Leafs 2025 first round pick as well. Probably going to be one of the final picks in the first round of this year's draft, as Toronto is one of the best teams in all of hockey. Igor Chernyshov selected 33rd overall for the San Jose Sharks last year, the first pick in the second round. And quite honestly, I thought it was pretty crazy that he slid into the second round. And what a start to the 2024 NHL draft the San Jose Sharks got off to. I mean, Macklin Celebrini, getting Sam Dickinson as late as they did, although I thought they were going to go Zeev Buium. I don't blame them for going Sam Dickinson. And then getting Igor Chernyshov with the 33rd overall pick. Phenomenal first three selections. I think those were the first three for San Jose. I don't believe they had another pick in between Dickinson and Chernyshov, but I could be wrong about that. However, since I've spoken to JD Young many times, he's one of the closest fellow hosts that I'm friends with, I guess you could say, here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I talk with him very frequently. I know the Sharks love Igor Chernyshov. I don't know if a late first would be enough to do it in this year's draft, which is very top heavy, top 4, top 5. Then the rest is kind of the rest. I don't think they'd be very inclined to make that type of deal. However, I do like the thinking. I do think the Blackhawks are now at a point, and we know Kyle Davidson loves to be aggressive at the NHL draft, where they're at a quality over quantity point in their prospect pool. And it's great to have all of these draft picks, but they simply don't have enough room for all of these draft picks. So it's going to get to a point, we're already there, where they need to start packaging some of these picks to move up and just go and get some of their guys. So I don't think it's going to wind up working with the San Jose Sharks for Igor Chernyshov in this specific deal. But I do like the mindset Northern Warrior Hockey. I think the Blackhawks are definitely at that point where they're going to be trying to shop some of their picks, package them together, move up, and get one of those guys GMKD has high aspirations for, like we saw with a Marek Vanacker. I know that was a later first-round pick, but those are moves I think we're going to continue to see the Blackhawks make in future NHL drafts. Next question comes from Luke Heinzman. Question for the mailbag. This year's draft is starting to feel like a two-horse race between Misa and Schaefer. Martone and Higgins are starting to have serious question marks about them being stars. If the Hawks fall to 4, what do you think is the best way to try and get a star for the future, as we desperately need one? Desperately need another big-time forward along with Connor Bedard, I think is the big priority moving forward. That's why, I'm not going to bury the lead. I'll have another question about that topic coming up here in just a second. But should the Blackhawks finish at number 4, we obviously have to see who finishes number 1, who's at 2 and 3 ahead of them. Number 4, it would be disappointing, but it's not the end of the world for the Blackhawks, because ultimately they're likely going to be choosing between James Higgins and Porter Martone, whoever is going to wind up being on the board. Like you said, it's pretty clear cut that Schaefer and Misa, whatever order it's going to be, those to me seem like picks number 1 and 2 in this year's draft. And then Higgins and Martone are going to be 3 and 4. I think Higgins probably still has the edge over Martone as a true center iceman, point per game as a freshman for one of the top programs in the country. No, it's not Bedard. No, it's not Celebrini. Still having an outstanding first year of NCAA hockey. I think Higgins winds up being the 3rd overall pick. Should that happen in the Blackhawks, take Porter Martone at number 4. I don't think that's the end of the world by any means. They don't necessarily need a center. They just need stud forwards. And Porter Martone certainly could be that. And he has the size and skill combo, which is something the Blackhawks have desperately missed for a long, long time, as Northern Warrior Hockey just outlined. And as I've talked about on my show for quite a while, I don't think coming away with Porter Martone would be the end of the world. I do wonder if the Blackhawks would try to maybe move up to number 2. Like, let's say San Jose gets number 1. They're taking Matthew Schaefer. If they really are set in stone, they want Michael Misa, I think they'd try to make a move to the 2nd overall pick. It's just hard to get those types of selections, hard to make trades that early in the draft. It's an easier said than done type of thing. So if the Blackhawks wind up with the 4th overall pick, the most likely outcome is they take Porter Martone, or should he happen to go number 3, then they take James Higgins. But I think they'll more than likely, not because of their own choice, they'll probably have to stay at number 4, but I think they'd give it a run to try to go up to number 2 and get Michael Misa. That's what I'd be trying to do. But again, easier said than done. Next question comes from Zane Mandel, who asked, as it stands right now, who would you take if the Blackhawks get the top pick? Is Schaefer a lock, or should we prioritize top-end forward talent to play with Bedsy? Follow up. Who do you like best between Misa, Martone, and Higgins? All right. Who would you take if the Blackhawks get the top pick? It's a fascinating question. Fascinating question, and a debate that's been going on in my comment section since I kind of brought it up a few days ago. If the Blackhawks get the number 1 overall pick, I'd be hard-pressed to not take Michael Misa. I love Matthew Schaefer. The blue line is very deep, especially on the left-hand side. I know Schaefer is a different level, and he's only 17 years old, tons of runway. But we need forward help along with Connor Bedard, and that doesn't necessarily have to come from the NHL draft. The Blackhawks can spend in free agency, but again, that's not as easy as, oh, we got a lot of money, we're going to get guys, right? And the free agent market isn't as appealing as it seemed like it was going to be just a couple of months ago. So it's a tough give and take, but it would be really tough for me not to take Michael Misa, considering what he's done at 17 years old in the OHL, the leading point scorer, unreal goal scoring ability, along with Connor Bedard. It would be fun to think about those two. That's probably the way I'd go, but man, it is really, really tough to pass on Matthew Schaefer for the range that he has, the frame that he has, and the upside that he possesses at a young age. Super, super hard to pass on. But I really do think Connor Bedard needs someone like Macklin Celebrini has with Will Smith. I know he kind of has that with Frank Nazar, but I think we need one more forward along with Bedard to develop with these next few years. Who do I like best between Misa, Martone, and Higgins? It's Misa for sure. I do still have Higgins over Martone, though, at this point in time, as I alluded to just a moment ago, but don't think Porter Martone would be a bad consolation prize in this year's draft. Last question that I'm getting to on today's show comes from Ian Tedlin, who emailed in the podcast and asked, best and worst trade for the Blackhawks at this year's deadline. Didn't really watch all that much, but would love an update. Sure. No real bad trades, I don't think, from the Blackhawks at this year's deadline. I think the Seth Jones one, though, undoubtedly has to be the best, considering they got Spencer Knight, who could be their goalie of the future. That's what they're hoping for. I believe he can be, along with the first-round pick, while only retaining $2.5 million of Seth Jones' contract. In a situation where the Blackhawks had no leverage, they could only trade him to Dallas or Florida, apparently, and Dallas wasn't really all that interested. So GMKD really only had one option, and he was going through a bit of a health scare while dealing with all of this, and still wound up getting this type of return for Seth Jones. Undoubtedly the best trade for the Blackhawks at the deadline. None of them were really bad, though. I really like the Joe Veleno return, even if he's not a puzzle piece. Didn't have to retain anything on Peter Mrazek moving forward, and he's got one more year on his contract, and his play's kind of fallen off a cliff, although I did see he just pitched a shutout for the Red Wings the other night, so happy for you, Peter. The worst trade for the Blackhawks at the deadline would probably be the Taylor Hall one. Not technically a deadline trade, as it happened a month before, but only getting a third-round pick, even though it was the Blackhawks' own third-round pick, so it will be one of the first selections in the third round, probably only a 5, 6, 7 pick dispersion. Should they have gotten a late second-round pick from a contender? But I still feel like they did not get necessarily the best value, although in hindsight, considering Mikko Rantanen was only a member of the Carolina Hurricanes for 13 games, maybe that's why it was part of it, because there was no extension in place. But still, I think the Blackhawks probably should have gotten a late second for Taylor Hall at that point, but we're kind of nitpicking here, and that's my point. There were no real bad trades from general manager Kyle Davidson at this year's deadline. I think he did a really good job of unloading the Jones contract, unloading the Mrazek deal, getting them both to spots they wanted to be in, getting Craig Smith off of the books to open up a spot for another one of these guys. Thought it was a good deadline by general manager Kyle Davidson. I gave him 2 thumbs up. But that's going to finish up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. Everyone, as always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcasts, and go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jag Bushman. You can find me on X at Jag Bushman 2, but make sure to follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your days. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.